Good evening. I hope you can hear me well, and those at the back as well. So I can speak softly, because Schubert likes the soft voice, as are some more dramatic moments we will discuss later on. But before we embark on Schubert's sonatas, I'd like to start with a simple question. What is a piano sonata? Now, for those who are well versed in this, please bear with me. I'll be very, very brief. So, the sonata emerged from the one-movement works of Domenico Scarlatti, the Baroque composer, who wrote more than 500 piano sonatas. They are very short, so 2 or 3 minutes. Some of them are very buoyant in character, like for instance you have the sonata in D major. Others are a bit more somber, like the B minor sonata. Now, of course, these works were written for the harpsichord, that instrument over there. But they were very well played on a modern instrument. And now, eventually, years later, developed the 3-movement and 4-movement piano sonata, as exemplified by the works of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. And it was with the latter, with Beethoven, that really saw the culmination of the piano sonata, with his 32 piano sonatas, because he elevated the piano sonata on a par with the symphony. Because at the time, sonata was written mainly for students, an exercise for students, but it was Beethoven who really gave it that importance, that significance. Now, where is Schubert in all of this? Now, Schubert I consider to be the threshold that leads from the classical period to the Romantics. As such, he is the last major composer who wrote a rich quantity of sonatas, around 21, although some of them are incomplete. Because later, composers like Brahms, like Liszt, like Chopin, they wrote relatively few piano sonatas. Brahms, for instance, wrote 3, Chopin 3, Liszt 2, because they wanted to do away with this dominating genre. And we see the emergence, for instance, of the miniature form, like the mazurkas. We have the preludes, the waltzes, the ballades. So it's actually Schubert who we consider to be the last major composer who have a large collection of piano sonatas. But what makes it's interesting is that most of these works have been neglected throughout the years. For instance, in 1928, 100 years after Schubert's death, Rachmaninoff was, at the time, one of the greatest pianists, apart from being a composer. He admitted that he did not know that sonatas by Schubert existed. Now we are talking about Rachmaninoff here, who still is considered one of the greatest ever. So what is the problem? What is the prejudice against these works? And I find 5 main reasons. Now one of them is that Schubert did not have a prepossessing appearance of the genius that he was. It was not like Beethoven. When you see a portrait of Beethoven, for instance, it demands respect, veneration. With Schubert, less so. Secondly, despite playing the piano, he was not a prodigy or the excellent pianist that Beethoven was, or that Mozart was, for instance. And he did not have students to whom he could pass on his performance tradition. Thirdly, most of his music was never published or performed in his lifetime. And this led, for instance, some years later, his great symphony in C major was abandoned during his lifetime because it was considered too difficult, and it was performed much later. Four, he was more known as a composer of the art song, of the miniature forms, which he composed throughout his lifetime. And he was considered as not being able to master the larger forms, like the symphony or the sonata. Of course, this was not true. And the fifth reason that I find, and this is the most damning for Schubert, I think, is that he lived most of his lifetime under the shadow of a certain Ludwig van Beethoven. And this was a very big problem for him. They lived in the same city of Vienna at the time, and they died within a year of each other, Beethoven in 1827 and Schubert in 1828. So practically he lived most of his life under the shadow of Beethoven, because what could be written after the 32 piano sonatas of Beethoven, for instance? Now, what makes Schubert Schubert? And what differentiates Schubert from Beethoven? Now, Schubert interpreter is sometimes seen to be as the man, the poet of the keyboard. Now here I'm going to refer to the title of this lecture, which is Poetry in Music. But what is a poet of the keyboard? And why are there no poets of the violin, for instance, or the baton? We seldom hear that. The piano, as an instrument, is best suited to evoke certain associations. It is held in repute as a percussive instrument, which it is. It does not have any identity of its own. It is like a protein actor, who, without having any identity of their own, they are able to fit into any character that they want. Now, another facet of poetry, my opinion, is that it relates more to feeling rather than to reason. Poetry must never force itself upon you. It's very important. Poetry must never force itself upon anyone. A poetic person, poetic piece, work, is never sober, dry, monumental, or heroic. So for instance, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is not poetic, because poetry has got more to do with the intimate, with the personal. There is something of the ineffable here, which cannot be truly expressed in words. But poetry, there's something of the sublime. I wouldn't describe something poetic as a whole word. It could be just a small phrase that I would describe as poetic, as the sublime. And it is a fleeting moment. Once you try to grasp it, it's no longer there. Once you have that epiphany, it's gone, it has passed on. And not everybody responds to it in the same manner, if at all. I think it is the privilege of the few. Now, to express this in music, for instance, let's play the first movement, the opening of Schubert's Sonata in G major, which I find the opening is very poetic, very intimate. It's as if Schubert is inviting us into his own private world. Now, of course, I could approach this work in a completely different mindset, and it still would work very well, because that is the beauty of music, the beauty of the art, in the sense that there is never a one definitive approach. Now, to discuss all of Schubert's sonatas within the constraints of this lecture site would be impossible. So I'm going to focus on just one work, the sonata in A minor, the second one which he wrote, because he wrote 3. Now, why this particular work? So to answer this, we have to go back to the year 1819. Schubert was 21, and he was already an established composer, despite his relatively young age. He wrote his first symphonies, first string quartets, the songs which he wrote throughout his lifetime, and the first sonatas. And among them we find the A major sonata, which is one of his most popular among this early period, and it precedes the sonata that we are going to discuss today. Like a song, you have this long melodic line in the warm key of A major. Now, 4 years had to pass before Schubert turned back to composing a piano sonata. And in those 4 years, his life changed irrevocably. So what happened? In the fall, December of 1822, he contracted syphilis. And syphilis at the time was a death sentence, be it in a few weeks, in a few months, or in a few years. At least one's death. And in the case of Schubert, it was a few years later, in 1828. And apart from its physical pain, which was horrible, it also brought with it a certain psychological pain, a humiliation, and depression. So I want to read you a letter which he wrote to a friend around this time, and I quote, "I feel myself to be the most unhappy and wretched creature in the world. Imagine a man whose health will never be right again, a man whose most brilliant hopes have perished, to whom love and friendship have nothing to offer but pain, whose enthusiasm for all things beautiful is gone. And I ask you, is he not a miserable, unhappy being? Each night, on retiring to bed, I hope I may not wake again, and each morning but recalls yesterday's grief." So we have to see the work, this sonata in A minor, within this context of doom, of tragedy. Now, I ask myself, why the key of A minor? Why not G minor? Why not B minor? So if you look back, the A minors, the key of A minor, has been associated with some of the most tragic works. For instance, Verdi wrote his Requiem in A minor. Of the worship. Now, within our own context, it is interesting to notice, our Gothic context, Monsignor Farrugia wrote his own requiem in the key of A minor, perhaps as a subtle nod to Verdi, and the opening is like this. Sense of doom. I'm digressing, but this work will be revived after it was performed in 1891 at the Church of St. George as part of the liturgy, and it will be revived again after more than 100 years. As this year, as you know, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Monsignor Farrugia's death. Within the context of the piano sonata that we're discussing, there is one particular work in the key of A minor, that is Mozart's sonata in A minor. He only wrote two in the minor key. One of them is the A minor. Mozart's a bit more dramatic here. This was written after the death of his mother. So again, you see the association of A minor with death, with tragedy. So this perhaps explains why Schubert chose the key of A minor. And another interesting point is that Beethoven never wrote a sonata in A minor. Among the 32 sonatas, there's not one in A minor. Schubert wrote 3. I find it particularly significant. Now, let's go on, delve deeper into this work. It is in 3 movements, and the first movement is, as was usual at the time, in sonata form. Now, what was this? It's divided into 3 sections. We have the exposition, where the composer introduces his main thematic material, the development, where he develops this material, and then the recapitulation. We have the return of the main theme. And the theme here is like this. Funeral march, sort of. From just the opening phrases, you already get the sense of doom that is inflicted upon Schubert's life. Now this will develop, and we'll have the theme again in octaves. It's almost like an orchestral tutti. he doesn't know where he's going. Until we get a tremolo. Which establishes the new key of E major, which will be the second subject of this sonata. And we come to E major now. Now, the major key is most of the time associated with happiness, with a more upbeat character. But Schubert, and this he shares with Mozart, imbues it with a certain melancholy, with a certain sadness, as we get here in this chorale, sort of in E major. Silence. Now we come to the development section, which is a bit more dramatic. It fluctuates between F major and D minor. And then we get a new theme, which is like a dance. Accompanied with the psi motif. Remember this? Now we get in the left hand. So let me play it too. come back to the recapitulation, which is almost an exact repetition of the first section. But then the chorale that we talked about, the E major, is now in A major, as in triplets. So let me play to the last part. And the ending in A major, I find quite significant as well. It doesn't end in A minor, it's in A major. Because he's asking, is there any hope for me? Now we come to the second movement, which is quite unusual for its normal context, which is written after that tragic first movement. It's in the key of F major, which was not much related with A minor. It's usually either in C major or in the dominant E major, but F major. And you get this theme, it's like a song, a prayer. Which is then answered with just like an aside here in a Shakespearean play, commenting upon the main theme. Now here I have an interesting detail. Schubert writes con sordini, the una corda, which is the left pedal here. And when I press a key, the hammer hits 3 strings. Now at the time, Schubert's piano, and on modern instruments not possible. When you press the una corda, you hit 1 string, that's why it is called una corda, and the sound changed completely. It was very muffled, the color changed. Unfortunately, on the modern instrument, it is not possible, so we try to imitate that sound using your own fingers. Now let's continue. This is further development. Then we have a new theme with triplets. Now comes again the theme in the tenor voice, which is accompanied with this triplet figure in the right hand, and the effect is very ethereal. pausa until we come back to the theme for the final time. This brings us to the finale, the final movement, which unfolds in moto perpetuo, meaning you have triplets on the right and left, accompanying, imitating each other in counterpoint. And this is juxtaposed with another major section, which again, like we had in the first movement, is imbued to certain melancholy, sadness. And the overall effect of this movement, it's a rondo form, so we have these two themes appearing throughout. The effect is a full-blown tempest, like the ripping apart of a Delacroix canvas. So let me play it through. The major theme. Now back to the theme. Again, the major section, this time in C major. here, the music reaches sort of, and again, sort of moments of stasis. Does it know where he's going? He wanders around, modulates in different keys, until we come again for the final time to the A minor section, followed by the major section. So it goes like this. The major section, this time in A major. The coda. And those four chords are for me a metaphorical representation of the four nails to the coffin. At the end, darkness prevails, illness prevailed, and death prevailed. Now what happened to Schubert to conclude after this? He enjoyed a relatively few years of normal health. His health seemed to have, the illness seemed to have gone away, because then it returned in 1827, and the end of 1827, which ultimately led to his death in November of 1828. And I asked myself, had he died in 1827, we would have lost some of his most greatest works that he wrote. For instance, the 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐻, which is the 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐧𝐨, the greatest 𝐒𝐤𝐚𝐧𝐨 ever for voice and piano. The string quintet in C major, and the last three piano sonatas, which he wrote in 1828. And I find it particularly significant that the first one that he wrote is in the key of C minor. Now why I find it significant? The key of C minor is associated with Beethoven. He wrote some of his greatest works, Beethoven, in the key of C minor. For instance, the famous Fifth Symphony is in the key of C minor, has a piano trio in C minor, the Coriolan Overture in C minor, the piano concerto in C minor. of C minor. We have an early one, and we have the famous Pathetique sonata. The last sonata which he wrote in the key of C minor, the opus 111. So these are some of the great works which he wrote in C minor. And I think Schubert knew what he was doing when he composed his sonata in C minor. And he composed it after Beethoven was already dead and buried. So I feel that at last Schubert was free to really dictate his own terms, to tackle the composer which he venerated in his own ground. And we have the sonata in C minor. Notice the difference, the similarity with the Pathetique. And here we have Is it a coincidence? I don't know. It is one of the many unanswered questions which I have. I think this is all the time I have for today. Thank you.